What is going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be giving you my spoiler-free review for Final Destination Bloodlines, which of course is the 6th Final Destination film in the franchise. This has been one of my most anticipated movies of this year, and so I was really looking forward to it. And I gotta say, it's really something else. It's pretty insane. So let's just go through the positives, the negatives, and then I will give it a rating out of 10. Starting off with the positives, I loved how different this felt from the other Final Destination films. Whenever there's a sequel in a franchise, especially a franchise that's lasted as long as Final Destination, I feel like you have to start doing some really different things with them. You can't just do the exact same thing, maybe change up the kills, change up the characters, and that's about it. You really need to do something very different. And although this movie does feel very similar to other Final Destination films for the most part, I do really appreciate the family dynamic they gave us with the main characters. Most of these movies focus on a group of friends or random characters that don't even know each other and then eventually start to learn more about each other. But this movie went in a very different direction where the main characters are all a family. They all are related to each other or have some sort of connection. Obviously, that's where the title Final Destination Bloodlines comes into play. That's the whole connection between the characters. But I think it works in a really different way than the other movies because when certain characters die, it's way more impactful than it would be if they were random people that didn't know each other. Because like I said, for most of those other movies, someone dies, they either don't even know about it till way later, or it doesn't really affect them that much. They don't really care that much because they didn't know the person as well. Whereas in this movie, there's a lot more emotional weight behind each death. It genuinely tears apart this family piece by piece with each death. And this allows for the movie to have way more emotion to it than the majority of these movies usually have. Of course, this movie still has that campy feel that the majority of these movies have. You will be laughing for a lot of the film, don't get me wrong, but they still managed to have an emotional pull there with the characters. I actually even teared up in a scene, which I didn't expect to do in a Final Destination movie, but regardless, it happened because there was a bigger emotional pull to these characters. And it all goes back to the main character, Stephanie, who's honestly one of the best main characters in this series. I would argue maybe even the best main character. Overall, the characters are pretty great. You know, I think this franchise has had some pretty solid characters throughout it. I think the first couple films had like some of my favorite characters, but in this one, I actually really liked a lot of them. They were either funny or they were just fun to watch. They were, the acting was good. There was just really, interesting scenes involving them. They did a great job with that. And again, it all goes back to the whole family dynamic. That's what makes it work so well. A lot of the movie has the characters together as well. Like I said, for the other Final Destination films, a lot of the times they're kind of doing their own thing off on their own. But this is very different where a lot of the times when the deaths happen, they're with other characters. They're around other characters because they're family. So obviously they're going to be more likely to be surrounded with each other. The film's also really well directed. Like, I was genuinely shocked by how good some of the scenes looked. And I would say it still has the same feel in terms of its directing style as some of the other Final Destination films, but it was just really great. Like, there was some amazing shots that were just so crazy. I will say there maybe is too much CGI being used, especially for some of the kills, but I think it looked great. Like, visually, it was great CGI, so I'm not really complaining there. And speaking of the kills, oh my god, like, there were some of the goriest, most fucked up ones this franchise has ever seen, which is really a high bar because they've had some insane ones before, but I think they have it beat for this one. Like, these ones are just insane, gruesome. There honestly isn't as many kills as I feel like the other films have. Like, when I'm really thinking about it in my head, I feel like the other films usually had more characters, which resulted in more death scenes, but regardless, the ones here were insane and completely blew my mind. And one of the best parts of any Final Destination film is that opening premonition scene. And I think this movie has the best opening premonition scene of the entire franchise. It is so good. It's a pretty long sequence. It might be the longest one they've ever done. Like, it was a good 20-minute sequence, but I was obsessed with it. I thought it was so well directed. I thought every bit of detail to it was amazing. There's a couple of really interesting story elements to it, and the way they focus on the aftermath of this premonition is very different than majority of these films, and I appreciated that. I appreciate how different it was, but it was terrifying. It covered a lot of fears that people tend to have, especially the fear of heights, and that's obviously something that's a very common fear, so it really was effective in scaring the hell out of the audience for that. But there are some moments in it that are just, again, just like this franchise usually does, just insanely bizarre, over the top, but in a way that works, because yes, it's over the top, but it technically is plausible to happen. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, this could happen, but like not in this severe of a way. Like just each thing that happens in the way it does is just too coincidental and convenient. But that's the point of these movies. It's kind of the idea of them. You have to kind of be on board with the concept of these movies if you're going to get on board with some of these scenes. But regardless, that opening scene was amazing, and a big part of it was the soundtrack. There's a lot of good licensed songs that they use, or even just the original score itself. This movie as a whole has a fantastic soundtrack. I don't really usually think of these movies as having the best soundtracks ever, but this one really was incredible. And lastly, for the positives, I got to give a shout out to Tony Todd. He did have a scene in this film, and it was actually, I would say, his best scene in this entire franchise. He's of course been in multiple of these films. Unfortunately, he did pass away after filming this, so this is, I think, going to be his last ever film that he's in, and he did a great job. And it was a really nice scene. Like, it gave him a lot more dialogue than I feel like he usually gets, so I thought that was pretty cool. And it also focused a lot more on his character and his backstory, which I was not expecting. It also added a lot to the character. There was a lot of stuff we learned about him that we never knew before. Usually in these movies, he's just this like ominous figure that you don't really know much about the character, but this one actually gives a lot of story to him, which I thought was really cool. But now let's get into the negatives. Thankfully, there's not many negatives. I actually really loved this movie, but I do think, although of course the campiness and over-the-top nature of these films is totally fine, I'm on board with that, there was maybe one or two kills in this movie that I felt like went a little bit too far with the campiness. I was thinking to myself, that is just way too ridiculous. Like the plausibility of it was just beyond possible. And as much as I mentioned, like a lot of the scenes usually do have some sort of plausibility behind them. Again, they're usually meant to be over the top and insane in how they're done. But there was one that I was like, I just don't even think that's how that works. Like maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it does work like that, but it just felt so like, are you kidding me, in the way it was done? And it was a little bit too over the top, even though that's weird to say for a movie like this. But I do think they could have dialed that scene back just a little bit, and I think it would have worked a little bit better. But I do like the scene overall. I still do like that kill. There's just one or two moments like that where I was like, okay, they could have dialed that back just a teensy tiny bit. And although the dialogue is mostly good in this film, there is a couple of scenes with dialogue that I'm like, okay, that's kind of cheesy. Like there's a couple of specific lines of dialogue that just kind of give you that little cringe feeling where you're just like, oh, that's not how people talk. Like there's like a couple moments like that. Most of it was fine, but I felt that way once or twice, and I was like, I don't know, I just don't think that character would have said that. Another thing is that I felt like the movie, although for the most part this was perfectly fine, I do think the ending was a bit rushed. Like I felt like they should have let the end scene breathe a bit, just leave it for a little bit longer. There's a couple different moments where I was like, oh, I don't want it to end right here, but I know it's going to end right here. I feel like they could have expanded upon the final couple scenes just a little bit. They don't have to do some, large sequence necessarily, but just a couple more scenes and just make the tension last a little bit longer. I think it could have used a little bit more, but the way it ends, I was like, okay, I felt like a little bit rushed towards the end there. Overall, this is genuinely one of my favorite Final Destination films ever, which I was totally not expecting to happen. I was expecting to like it at least, but I wasn't expecting it to be one of my favorites, and arguably maybe even my favorite. Who knows? We'll do a ranking real soon where we'll talk about the specifics there, but I genuinely think this is one of the best Final Destination films, and it deserves all the credit it's been getting. I've been seeing really high Rotten Tomato scores for it, so I'm definitely happy to see that. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. It could have been a bit better, definitely could have improved on a few things here or there, but it is really close to being a perfect horror film in my opinion. So definitely go check it out if you haven't already. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Peace out, everyone.